Communication is one of the primary causes for preventable medical errors.
AdvoKAYte, holding healthcare accountable. This podcast is my way of sharing what I've learned about the mistakes, the cover-ups, and the ways we can all protect ourselves. We're all in this together. Hello and welcome to another episode of AdvoKAYte, holding healthcare accountable. I'm pleased to have Ann Roberts back in the studio for another episode from her vantage point as a vice president of a very large, prestigious hospital system, but also based upon her 30-some-odd years of experience working at a very high capacity for hospitals. Ann and I have so much to talk about. We could probably do the next 20 episodes and never break our stride. Mm-hmm. But for this episode, we're going to talk about preventable medical errors that occur in hospitals, and then what hospitals do when the unthinkable does occur. So welcome back, Ann, and thanks for being a sport and sticking around for longer.
Absolutely. You covered it well. We can have this conversation for hours.
We can, and I probably am going to be pecking you to come back and come back and come back and come back more and more and more.
My pleasure.
Well, let's jump into it. We know from it's very old by now, the Institute of Medicine report that was a landmark study that said preventable medical errors are at an epidemic level in this country. We don't really know what the rate of preventable medical errors is that harm patients in the U.S., partly because it's not something that's studied. But some have estimated them to be the third leading cause of death in the United States, behind heart and stroke. So I don't mean to put you on the spot and ask you to agree with that.
Yes, you do.
Yes, you're right. I did need to put you on the spot. Better to ask for forgiveness, right?
That's okay. That's okay.
Well, it's like that age-old thing in court where the lawyer makes like a speech and then asks a question on the end. It's like, what was that? That wouldn't be allowed in court. But in all seriousness, we do know from neutral, reputable sources that medical errors that are deemed to be preventable still happen.
Right.
Prime example, wrong side surgeries, leaving foreign objects behind in patients, things of that nature. So I want to spend some time talking about why do preventable medical errors occur in healthcare at such high rates or at all.
Sure.
What's your take on that?
To err is human, I believe is what you were referring to.
Yes.
And so you're right. It is one of the leading causes of harm in healthcare. And there's many, many reasons. You know, any organization, any business can put in as many safeguards as possible, and there are still going to be safety events that occur. You know, there's several things that play into preventable errors, and there have been some studies. A lot of hospitals now participate in what's called patient safety organizations, where they can, you know, report certain things, such as a preventable error that occurred confidentially to the organization, and that organization will take the information from all of the hospitals that participate and analyze it to be able to identify, okay, what happened in these cases and how can we, you know, develop additional protocols. But one of the biggest pieces for preventable medical errors is communication. That is one of the biggest breakdowns. And whether that, you know, is because they failed to communicate a test result in a timely manner, there was poor handoff, language barriers. Perhaps they didn't have, you know, an appropriate interpreter. The patient didn't understand discharge instructions. Communication is one of the primary causes for preventable medical errors. And making sure that you have a care team that's cohesive, making sure that everybody on the team is communicating closely, understand timeouts, for example, you know, doing those checklists are ways to prevent that But when you have human error that occurs, you may have somebody who's a bad actor, maybe somebody that disregards policies and protocols, who doesn't complete a checklist the way that they're supposed to. Just like in any industry, any business, there's going to be bad actors that disregard that. So there's the human factor. Mistakes will happen. Perhaps they are fatigued. They, they're distracted. Maybe they have something in their personal life that is, really distracting them. Everybody's human, things happen. They still have to go to work, but it is, again, just a little higher level for them, or not little, it's a very high stakes for them coming in and they're providing patient care. Complexity, system complexity, hospital complexity. Particularly when you have a large system with multiple hospitals, multidisciplines, and let's say the complexity of a patient even having to move from floor to floor, unit to unit, a lot of different specialists working together, that increases the chance of a ball being dropped. Communication, documentation not being on par and where it needs to be is a big one as well, which falls under the communication category. But it's impossible to expect perfection. As much as we would love to have, perfection, you're going to have things that, happen, unfortunately. So are patients aware of the things that happen? I think is, part of things to talk about. It depends. And the other thing is sometimes there's known complications. Sometimes there's, things that they can anticipate could be a complication, which is why when they go into a procedure, they have what's called informed consent, where the doctor or the practitioner is sitting down with the patient, and we're all patients. So at some point in our lives, we've met with doctors, we've gone through informed consent, and they talk to you about the risks, the benefits, that can happen with any type of procedure that you're going through. But I don't know that there's any real answer to how to absolutely prevent medical errors. That's not possible. So for many reasons.
Well, I'll say this. First of all, when you said the informed consent form, did you mean to say the CYA form? That's what I call it.
Well, no, I meant informed consent, but you do have to make sure informed means informed.
That's right.
That the patient truly is understanding it. But patients also have to understand they need to ask questions if they are not clear, if they don't understand something. There's this mentality of, well, the doctor's always right, and, or they just want to get through it. They don't want to, deal with a lot of paperwork. And then something happens after the fact and they're questioning it, understandably so. I mean, they're not clinical and they just trust the doctors. But patients also need to be their own advocate. And if they have questions, they should ask. So an informed consent is meant to inform them of the risks and so forth. But is it a CYA when somebody's just rushing through it and not doing it appropriately because they're not following, protocols and so forth? I mean, I can agree with you at times in that situation. That would hopefully not be
right. When the patient's handed a clipboard that's more like a legal disclaimer document, and they know they've got to sign it. So, yeah. But again, this is why we could talk 20 episodes, because we could go down that rabbit trail and talk about that issue. But I did want to say, I agree with you about communication failures. And I think part of the reason there are so many communication failures is you have, the surgeon who performs the operation isn't necessarily the surgeon that's going to follow the patient in the hospital. Right. Maybe that surgeon has a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant, or the hospital has an arrangement with another group of hospitalists or internists that's going to follow the patient. And maybe that group also employs physician's assistants or nurse practitioners, and or there's a postoperative complication and the surgeon calls in, well, I'm going to need a gastroenterologist, I'm going to need infectious disease, I'm going to need radiology weighing in, well, maybe I need cardiology. And they're not talking to each other, mostly. They're documenting things in the chart. And then you'll get them in deposition when the catastrophe occurs, and there will be some cryptic note, and this deponent will say, well, let's say this is the radiologist. Well, when I said based upon the plain film x-ray that you ordered, there is no sign of a bowel perforation. The surgeon knew what I meant is, you idiot, you need to order a CT of the abdomen. I'm like, really? That's what you meant? Why didn't you just say, I strongly recommend a CT of the abdomen? But there's this kind of cryptic stuff. Or,
Now that's CYA.
yes, right. I get you.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to get crossways with.
Right. Well, they're being deposed by an attorney like you, and they're a double, they're thinking back to, okay, what should I have done in this situation? And how can I, spin this in a way that, well, yeah, they should have known what I meant, but I should have also been more clear in my documentation. Because if documentation is not clear, that does impact when they hand off to the next care team or to the next specialist. Then there should be timely documentation, accurate, clear, so that the next care team or the physician that's the subspecialist can pick up that chart and be able to say, okay, this is what's happened so far. We're waiting on these labs. These are the complications. This was the recommendation of the specialist who did the consult. They should be able to do that by reading and having thorough documentation in the medical records. And if they're not sure, they should pick up the phone and have a conversation. But yes, they should heavily rely on documentation, and that documentation should be clear, complete, accurate, and timely.
And put in the right place in the chart.
Yes.
That case that I was just referencing, the physician's assistant that was covering for the gastroenterologist who had been consulted by the surgeon said, if the patient is not better in the next 4 to 6 hours, we need to order a stat CT of the abdomen. Because she had a bowel perforation, she was becoming septic. And the nurse on that shift said, well, she didn't put it in the right place in the chart. I would have never looked in that part of the chart. And plus, I had way too many patients. I can't sit down and read the entire patient chart. I mean, I'm just getting in there looking like, what's the next order? And so the ball was dropped. Nobody ever followed up. And then until a code was called because she was in septic shock. So like you say, it's the right kind of communication, speaking clearly, say what you mean what you say. Just so many things. Handing off. There's so many people involved. And I think patients can relate to this because in the hospital, oftentimes it's like, well, we saw the hospitalist, but we're waiting to see the infectious disease doctor, but they're also kind of telling us different things, and we're waiting for the surgeon, but the surgeon sent the PA, the surgeon's going to be around later. And I think it kind of leaves patients at times feeling jerked around because they don't have, it's not the good old days where you had the attending and you had one attending and one quarterback calling all the shots.
Right. Systems are a lot more complex now. And of course, that also means that they have done further studies and are able to have a multidisciplinary care team that's going to be able to provide extensive care and for all ailments, not just the one diagnosis like they may have back then, but they have a multidisciplinary care team now that when working together cohesively as a team, when following the safety checklist, when having clear and accurate documentation, then they can, work together, and it is a partnership. I know I said that previously about the hospital and the doctors, but same thing with interdisciplinary care teams. It's a partnership, whether this is a scrub tech or a nurse practitioner, a PA, a physician attending, a surgeon. They're all working together for the safety of the patient, and they have to be on the same page, and documentation has to be in the right place. Absolutely. So,
well, I also want to kind of, in a friendly way, like you don't invite someone into your house and pick an argument with them, but I'm going to push back on something that you said. As a patient, I do expect perfection because it's my life or my loved one's life. And, I've actually read some books about this, this is part of where some people a lot smarter than me, so it's not just my opinion, but a lot of people have said this is one reason why we have the number of errors that we do is that healthcare came to say, look, Healthcare involves human beings delivering healthcare, not just robots or machines. And humans are infallible. Humans are going to make mistakes. But it always takes me to the airline example. I expect perfection from the airline. I'm hoping and praying for perfection with the airline, but I have a choice about whether I'm going to fly at all, whether I'm going to fly on a particular day. Like if they're de-icing the wings in Dallas, and I'm like, do they really know how to do that here in Dallas? I don't know if they really know how to de-ice, or a particular airline. If I have a choice, I'm going to fly one with a better safety record. But, and I didn't say this, somebody else said this, and I never can remember who to attribute the quote to. I think it was Dr. Marty McCary, but it may not have been, who said, the difference is if the pilot makes a human error or the co-pilot makes a human error, they're going down with the plane. And that's not true with the nurse or the doctor or the hospital administrator or whatever. So, of course, humans are prone to making mistakes. But I just wish we weren't so quick to accept that. So that's my little speech on that. Which perfect segue into, so what happens when mistakes are made? I want to begin by talking about the kind of outcomes that hospitals track. I like to say hospitals are some of the best data keepers of any business. They track all kinds of measurements and outcomes, and they know things that we, the patient, don't know.
Right.
So talk to us about that.
Sure. So, again, I work primarily with the medical staff. And so from a physician perspective, what they're looking at is, we've talked about subspecialty. And so they're looking at, you have general indicators across the board that every, should be met, whether that's infection rates, so forth, communication, as we've talked about. But then you have specialty specific requirements that you're looking at. So, for example, if you are a cardiothoracic surgeon, there are going to be outcomes, things that are expected or known complications, but then they're also tracking certain types within that specialty, certain indicators, and whether or not that individual physician is within the range that is deemed acceptable, or whether or not they haven't met the standard of care, in certain areas, whether or not, they're significantly delinquent in documenting things. Has documentation been an issue for them? That's one of the standard indicators that it may contribute to patient safety, as we've talked about. And so in tracking those things, whenever something does go wrong and somebody is deviating from the expectations in whatever way it is, if it is a patient safety event, then they have a team that really dives into those specific cases. If there is major harm to a patient, death and so forth, then there's a multidisciplinary team, which may include, members of the care team themselves, the leaders of that clinical department, so they can evaluate, of course, the case. A lot of that work is done behind the scenes, where they're doing case reviews and digging through the record, interviewing the staff that was in the room. And they're doing what's called a root cause analysis. And so they are looking at it for the purpose of really identifying what happened. Was this something that could have been prevented? Were there contributing factors, communication systems issues, equipment failure? They're looking at every aspect to say, why did this happen? Is there something that could have done to prevent it? What can we do in the future to ensure it doesn't happen again? Or this was a known complication and there wasn't much that we could have done to prevent it. And so it's really a root cause analysis to dive in and say, okay, what happened and what can we do to ensure it didn't happen again if it was something that was preventable?
So, going back to our analogy about the airline industry, when an airplane crashes, the FAA, swoops in, gets the black box, and does an independent analysis of what happened. And I've really advocated for that in healthcare. And again, we could go down a rabbit hole with this. We probably shouldn't, but with modern technology, they're really talking about having black boxes in the OR.
Mm-hmm.
And, I really think we should have some kind of a national organization that would look into things of this nature. We also have no mandatory reporting of medical errors. So when something preventable like that happens, like surgical fire, for example, yes, patients do actually catch on fire or are caught on fire in the operating room. That's 100% preventable. But when that occurs, they can report, but they're not required to report.
Well, yes and no. There are some regulatory requirements. For example, the Joint Commission, they are required to report certain adverse events. So there is some mandatory reporting that is required. And there's some state laws that require reporting to the Department of Health within their state if there are certain types of adverse events. Is it every single one? No. A lot of those things are handled internally for the purpose of saying, okay, what happened and what can we do better? And that's, peer review, of course, and the whole purpose of that is so they have these legal protections so they can have those open and candid conversations with, because they truly have that intent of, oh gosh, what can we do? How do we prevent this from happening again if it was an error? But there are regulations where, certain adverse events, they're required to report. And I have seen, CMS, for example, or the State Department or even Joint Commission come in and do an investigation into a specific case if they found that it was really an outlier and they want to come in and not just look at the provider and not just point fingers, but look at, okay, what processes, or system issues contributed to this, and are you running a safe facility? And so there are regulatory audits and regulatory requirements, but that doesn't cover everything, but it does cover some of the most significant errors, infection control mistakes, and so forth. And so it's a very heavily regulated organization. Do they pull a black box for every single thing? Absolutely not. But when are they looking at significant safety events? They're required to be reported. So,
to my knowledge, based on 40 years, I guess, in the field, I was very young when I entered the profession. No, I'm kidding. But after 40 years, I can readily bring to mind one instance where a hospital was fined by the state health department, and then they appealed it and scared them off, and they said, "Okay, we withdraw." So I don't know, from my standpoint, and I don't know that I would know necessarily, but I don't see hospitals really being regulated. They're kind of on the honor system a lot, I think.
Well, I think a lot of it's not publicized, of course. And so I will tell you, I get exhausted sometimes with how many regulatory surveys we have, how much scrutiny, I'd say maybe 30 to 40 surveys and audits a year from regulatory agencies. But that is just in, certain areas, disease-specific certifications and so forth. But whenever something does go wrong, a lot of the times, of course, it's not known because a lot of the information is privileged and confidential. And so, and even when it is disclosed to regulatory agencies, that's not going to be advertised either. And so there's a lot of things that go in internally for good reason. Would the public and others and malpractice attorneys love to know what that looks like? Of course they would. But as a hospital that's focused on patient safety, there also has to be that privacy to have those candid conversations, and there has to be regulatory oversight and some level of reporting to make sure that the hospital is indeed running a safe facility for patients. So,
like everything, the privilege is a privilege to be able to operate your business without fear of an attorney subpoenaing the information or whatever. But you gotta take the privilege and do right with it.
Absolutely.
And not everybody does, as you know. Well, I want to kind of end with talking about something that has become very popular with hospitals, which are, they go under different names, but it started as an apology management program where when hospitals identify something that went wrong that was their fault, that could have been prevented. Then they deploy the apology management program.
Mm-hmm.
From the patient's perspective, what that often looks like is a well-meaning person who's not a member of the care team shows up with a business card that says something like patient care advocate or something like that, and just wanted to check in on you. And we know this is a stressful time. You have unfettered access to the cafeteria. It's on us. We've arranged for you to have and your family to have a hotel room across the street from the hospital. We just want to make your life easy, whatever. And they ingratiate themselves with the patient and the family. And again, I'm telling you the way I see it done wrong and unfairly so many times. It's human nature whenever somebody's nice to you or somebody gives you a gift, you don't want to say, well, thank you very much. You're very kind, but I'm going to go get a lawyer and I'm going to sue you. And they know that their acts of kindness will dissuade most people who are good people who don't want to deal with people like me anyway, or the legal system. But what happens is that the hospital, its risk management department, its lawyers are all behind the scenes, and they have the really nice person on the front making friends with the patient, buttering them up so they don't get a lawyer. And then at some point, the offer is made. I'll tell you what, we're so sorry for what happened. We're going to waive your medical bills. It's on the house, whatever. And do you think I'm jaded? Probably I am, but I've had so many clients come to me and say, I thought I should just check before I sign anything. Is this a fair offer? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you came to me or somebody else, because no. And what the patient doesn't realize is it's not the patient dealing with this nice little patient care advocate or whatever they're called. It's the patient negotiating against the hospital's lawyers. And so I always tell people, if you come to a reputable medical malpractice attorney and it is a good offer, if it's a minor thing or whatever, a good lawyer will say, I think that's fair. I think that's fine. Thank God you're okay.
Yeah.
And just let it go. But people need to know they should at least get a consult from a lawyer before signing their lives away, because they could be making a big mistake.
Absolutely.
But the reason so many hospitals are using these apology management programs or whatever is they've done studies about how much money it's saving hospitals. And that's why they've become so popular, because they work and they dissuade people from filing lawsuits.
Well, and from a hospital perspective, it's called disclosure of unanticipated outcomes. And so there is a requirement, regulatory. I know I go back to that, but that's what I specialize in. There is a Joint Commission is an accrediting body that accredits most hospitals in the U.S., and they do have a requirement that hospitals have a disclosure of unanticipated events policy and protocol. And the intent behind it originally was and should be, an ethical obligation and responsibility to say a mistake was made. This is what happened, to, really have empathy and apologize. And that is the intent. But like we've talked about, there is a business component as well. There is the human error. There are different factors. There are system issues that may have contributed to the error. They are required to, have the disclosure and reporting obligations. I can't say that I have a lot of experience in this area because I don't work in risk management, but I'm familiar with it. I've worked in enough hospitals to know the CMS requirements also for it's also addressing it if the patient does complain or if there's a grievance. But that is the intent. But you're right. It's still a business, and the hospital has to weigh exactly how they're going to handle those types of situations, because at the end of the day, it could be a potential lawsuit. And everybody has to have mitigating factors in regards to, okay, well, if this then, what is the end result? How is that going to impact us as a hospital? How is it going to impact the individual clinician? In addition to what can we do to make things right with the patient? Is it always going to be fair and equitable? Should they consult a malpractice attorney depending on how significant it was? Yes. Like I said, I always like to believe the best, and hope that, hospitals that are out there are doing what's best for patients and following the regulations and guidelines, and that it is done for the right reasons with empathy, for the patient. So,
Well, I guess it's like life. It's, there's bad eggs in every
yeah.
profession, including lawyers. We're not exempt from that. We've got some scoundrels in our own profession. But, I always say we're all in this together. We're all patients, and we must demand better of our doctors and hospitals. And we have to constantly remind patients that it matters to them, because nobody ever thinks that something's going to happen to them. The number one thing clients say when they come to my office is, I never thought this would happen to me. And yesterday my life was this, and today and for the rest of my life is that.
Yeah.
And so it's not to scare people, but I think the only way we're going to get some things accomplished that we want to get accomplished to make healthcare safer for everyone is if we have more people saying, it hasn't happened to me, but I care about everybody, and we've got to demand a safer healthcare system for all of us.
Absolutely. And advocating can mean so many different things, right? We're talking about advocating for improving patient safety, for hospitals to be held accountable, for there to be that partnership with a focus. But then also one of the things we've talked about is advocating, teaching patients to advocate for themselves as well, and educating themselves, making sure that they know that, hey, like, you do have public information available where you can go online and look up a doctor's license and see if there's any actions that's been taken, by a state board. Often there's delays, often things that aren't, they're not reported. But it's also important for patients to know that you can ask questions. You need to be your own advocate as well. But yes, I agree with you. And the hope is that, there's advocates like us who are there to raise the flag and say, we know these things happen, such as in the Dunch case. And I don't know how many more we have, in our tracker. But in those cases, to identify, we know these things happen. We know this isn't an isolated incident or a specific hospital. We know this is a pattern or trend that we're seeing in healthcare in general. And, there are system issues, and we're here to advocate to say this, we need attention to this. And, healthcare needs to do better. The patients deserve better. So.
Yeah. We have the most expensive health care in the world, but by far not the best.
Yeah.
So we need to rectify that. But I just can't thank you enough for staying. I know you got to whisk off to the airport, so we'll get you out of here, but we'll have you back again for sure, if you'll agree to come back after I've been so disagreeable with you.
That's what makes it so fun, is we get to tackle both sides of the fence, and we both have a great understanding of both sides. And so you've seen the worst sometimes, I've seen the best.
Yeah.
And a little of in between. And so we get to come together and say, okay, how do we always strive for the best and educate others? So,
yeah. Well, thank you. And thanks to our listeners. If you've enjoyed what you've heard here and found it educational and enlightening, please like and subscribe and come back for our next episode, which is going to be a conversation with my law partner, Luke Metzler. We're going to talk about the next step, which is after a preventable medical error occurs and litigation is brought, how do we hold hospitals and institutions legally liable for the harm they've caused patients? I want to thank Ann Roberts for joining me for another episode of AdvoKAYte, Holding Healthcare Accountable. She's always such a source of brilliance and a delight for me to talk to. And I hope you found the information super helpful. And it gives us all hope that there are ways that we can reduce the rate and incidence of medical errors, and that there are people out there working to do so. I'm also excited about next week's guest, which is Dr. Shaw. Dr. Shaw is a physician practicing in the New England area of the United States. And Dr. Shaw, in addition to being a practicing physician, has also become vitally interested in the science of patient safety and what doctors and hospitals can do to reduce medical error and make healthcare safer for all of us. So I hope you will come back next week and join me for my conversation with Dr. Shaw, whom I know you will find to be very delightful.